So if we want to replace the slide assembly, that includes the capacity and volume slides, and there's two of them in the machine. So there's capacity and volume on this side, and there's capacity and volume on the back side as well. Okay? So because we're compressing on two sides of the screw, we have volume and capacity on each side, which are synchronized through, and we're controlling them through these command shafts. So the lower one is always the volume, the higher one is always the capacity. Okay? So in order for us to remove this slide assembly, which we see right here, we're going to have to take it out the discharge end. So in order to do that, we have to remove the discharge manifold. We have to take the command shafts off, which we will do. We'll just loosen these 4 bolts off and we'll slide them out as assembly. They just come out complete. I'll take one out right now, just so that you can see what it looks like. I'm going to take the command shaft from the capacity off. Again, it's really nice working on this machine on the floor. We're up in the air, and the compressor rooms are always louder. We're going to take these 4 bolts out. There's an O-ring underneath to seal it. Out it comes. So this is the command shaft. Okay, so it turns here. I'll show you when we take it apart what this will drive inside. Okay. This is what we call our latest version command shafts. You might see some that are older style than this, but this is the current version, and the older styles are obsolete. But this will replace them all. Now we're going to remove this discharge manifold and this command shaft, and we'll see what we have underneath here. We're going to have a look at the slide valve assemblies now. I've taken the discharge manifold off. Remember, we had a look at it before. Save some time. And I'm going to describe this assembly now. What we have is a series of rack shafts that turn here like this. And we talked about the command shaft. So here's the picture of here's the actual command shaft. And the volume one was down here. The capacity was up here. So it went through the discharge manifold here. This slot fits into the end of this gear. And if we turn this, it is now turning the capacity slide valve to full capacity from 0 capacity. So this is now 100% and back down to 0%. So you can see that it's doing it at the top and at the bottom. So we have a capacity slide valve at the bottom on this that's dealing with this side of the compressor, and at the top dealing with this side of the compressor. Okay? So we're only moving the capacity slide valve right now. If I did this on the volume, you can see now I'm moving the volume one. The other thing that you can take notice of is that these are synchronized. So they're always moving together. Okay? If this isn't assembled properly, and they're not synchronized, you'll have an imbalance in the compressor, which will cause vibration and eventually probably failure. So what we want to do is make sure that when we reassemble that they will be synchronized. These rack shafts, okay, are hardened steel because the discharge gas comes through here and protects the case hardened rack shafts are just protected that way. So now we're going to go ahead and remove some of the parts on there. So what we have is some blocks here that keep it lined up. So I'm going to remove those. We'll need to do these, we'll need to remove the shafts if we want to remove a slide valve. Take that, there's another one here. So these blocks are removed. They keep the rack shafts in position. So what they do, we'll do this one. Normally we would be doing this if we're going to remove the slide valves assemblies. If we have noticed that when we took the gate rotors out, we noticed some wear in them. So we're going to take them out and possibly replace them. Another one underneath. So this, again, we talked about this was the 240 millimeter. If we went up to the 401 millimeter, this would look the same. It's just everything would be bigger. That's what happens. Everything just gets bigger. Oh, these come. So now you can see what they're just, everything's a lot looser. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove these gears and the shafts so that we can move on to remove a slide valve. We're now going to remove the gear and shaft assembly. These gear and shafts are the same for the volume and the capacity. So in here we have a roll pin that we have to knock out. You can see the roll pin there. We have to knock that out. But it is retained. There's a set screw in the end, and we use a small Allen key, and we loosen off just loosen off the set screw, because it'll hold that roll pin in position. So now I'm going to knock that out. Now, position-wise, you have to position it, because if I turn it here where I can see the best and drive it out, I'm going to drive it into the casting. So you have to think ahead what you're going to be doing. So I'm going to knock it down this way. Now the other thing, if we're not planning on taking the machine too far apart, you want to be careful that you don't drive that pin and knock it right inside the compressor, because you're going to have to fish it out later then. So sometimes we'll stick a little rag in here, keep it from going in there, and I will knock that out. Now you want to use a roll pin that's large enough, a punch that's large enough, because here's a picture, here's the roll pin. There's actually a roll pin inside of another one. So there's two in there, but you can knock them both out together. So I'll take this out. as you can see, things don't always come out the way they're supposed to. So then, or what I'll do, we always have to adapt because not everything happens the way it's supposed to all the time. So we just knock this out here like this. And then we'll knock this down. And this will slide out. Taking note if there are any spacer washers in there. Note at the top, there's one at the top here for alignment. There's not one at the bottom. So we need to remember when we reassemble this, this spacer washer is at the top. We'll put that aside. And now we'll do the volume. So we'll go down here. And we have to knock this one out. Just knock this one. So you can see this one has a spacer. The spacer is at the end that we took the roll pin out. So that would be a thing to remember. So we'll just put this together. Set those aside. Now you can see I can move these independently of each other. So now everything's out of synchronization now. So when we reassemble, we have to remember that we do these together and these together. They have to move together. So let's remove the slide valve assembly. So if we look, we can see the slide valve assembly is here in the bottom. There's 3 bolts that are going to hold it in position. Okay, but what we see there is not the bolts. Those are just plugs. So what we're going to do is we have to remove those plugs, and they're put back in with sealant on them. Because you would, if you didn't seal them, you'd have some oil and refrigerant coming out. Now, be careful when you remove those, because you could have some trapped refrigerant behind there. So you take it out slowly. So you could all of a sudden feel a little bit of oil coming out with a little bit of refrigerant. It's not going to be much, but it's just to be careful, that's all. Just be aware of it. So we're going to remove those. It'd work better if I put an extension on it, wouldn't it? So again, you can see that these are just plugs. The actual bolt is up inside. I'm going to remove those. So now we're going to remove the bolt that's in there. I'm going to use this, well, we call it an Allen key or whatever. So we're going to put that inside there. And there's some special locking washers in there. We're going to remove that one. I'll show them to you. Here's the bolt and with the locking washer. These washers are called Nordlock washers. These are called Nordlock washers. They're one-time use. So when you take these out, you put new ones in. Okay? So you've got, new ones will be kind of stuck together as a pair. But you can see the serrated, fine serrated edges there that lock it in place there. But inside they also have coarse serrated. The coarse go together and the fine are out. They're called Nordlock washers. You can buy them in packages. You have to decide how many you need. We use a couple different sizes on a compressor. So here's a bolt with the Nordlocks. This bolt is going through the casing right here and bolting that assembly into the frame and locking it in place. Do one more. Remember, there's 3. These are torqued as well as installed with Loctite. So I've removed those 3. So there's actually nothing that's going to hold that slide valve assembly in place now. Now we're ready to pull it out. I referenced the Loctite, and here's a sheet, a build sheet, that shows us the torque values of reassembly and whether or not it gets Loctite or not. So if we take a look here, for instance, the end cover plates, it shows a torque value of 78 pounds. NL means no Loctite. If we take a look at, here's a picture of the slide valve, and remember these are the 3 bolts that we just took out. 3 of them. It says 20 pounds. BL means blue Loctite. So if we look at this sheet back again, blue Loctite 243, red 271. Here's blue 243. It's a medium strength, can be removed. Here's the red Loctite 271. It's a high strength. It can be removed as well. So you need both of those for reassembly on one of these compressors. Okay, so we removed those bolts. One of the things I want to mention is that there's 2 longer ones and a shorter one. The reason for that is, remember I took one out here. This space is shorter here, so it uses a shorter bolt. But here it has to go through more casting. That's why it uses a longer bolt. So you look back here and you go, okay, that's farther out. These 2 are farther out than that one, so that uses the 2 longer ones. That's the reason for that. So now that we've removed those, we can grab this slide valve and we can grab this and we can pull the whole assembly out of there. So this is the whole slide valve assembly. Okay? So what we have here is we have the volume slide and we have the capacity slide. And these slides cover the rotor inside here. And the capacity will allow the suction gas to come back in at different parts of the rotor. And we will discuss that as well. The volume changes the shape of the discharge port, or the size of the discharge port, and how much refrigerant will leave the compressor, basically when it leaves the compressor. That's it for removing the slide valve. Now this is replaced as a complete assembly. These are set up in the shop, in the factory, in a jig, with all the dimensions and the clearances and shimmed. So we would replace those as an assembly if they were worn out. Wear areas are on the back here, on the actual frame. Why would it wear? Even liquid refrigerant coming into the machine will cause more wear. A lot of movement, so if the unit is not set up properly and there's a lot of hunting going on. So that is what causes excess wear on the back side of the slide valve. I'll put that down. It kind of falls apart, flops around a little bit. Inside here, we have some push rods. And they come in at the back end of the slide valve through these holes here. And you can see on this particular machine, now this is our trainer, it's torn away here a little bit. Okay, that's one of the things you can look for. Why is that torn away like that? What happened was somebody took the slide valve out and reassembled it incorrectly. And it tore that out of there. And one of the problems this machine had was that the slide valves were sticking. So eventually someone could not find the problem, and they eventually just replaced the machine. And we ended up getting this machine as our local training machine. And that's when I took it apart to see the status of the compressor. That's what I found. I found that part broken. So these rods back here, they are part of the balance pistons. When I say balance pistons, we're using these slide valves, see the discharge pressure. So we're porting discharge pressure back to help the slide valve move. Okay. Once we get into really high compression ratios, it's much more difficult for the slide valves to move. And it makes it easier with balance pistons. And even in our really high pressure machines, we don't even have slide valves. We do all capacity control with VFDs on the compressor.